Hey guys, it's Marina with Artworthy Life, where I teach Christ-centered art journaling that gets you into God's Word every day. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another live. And we are going to be doing an art journal page from start to finish. If you don't know what art journaling is, it's kind of self-explanatory. It is the combination of art and journaling, and that's what we're going to do today. What's fun is we get to actually do one inspired by the scriptures that we're working on inside the Artworthy Journal Club, and I like to share a little bit with you guys too, even if you're not a member of the club. So before we get started, I like to start our day on the right foot, which the best way to do that is with some scripture. So we're going to read a little bit of Psalm 119, and while I'm getting ready to read that, if you are just jumping on, please say hashtag live if you are watching live, and hashtag replay if you're watching the replay. Alrighty, we're going to start with a short verse that comes from the passage titled Yod, and Yod is one of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. If you don't know anything about Psalm 119, it just happens to be the longest chapter in the Bible, and it's divided in sections in alphabetical order according to the Hebrew alphabet. And the section we're working on this week inside the club is Yod. That's one of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And so I'm going to read a passage from Yod, just from this bookmark that came with our happy mail that went out to our great club members. So the first verse in Yod is Psalm 119:73, and here's what it says: Thy hands have made me and fashioned me. Give me understanding that I may learn thy commandments. I think that's beautiful. Thy hands have made and fashioned me. And what that reminded me of was also another verse in the Bible which talks about God forming us like a potter forms the clay. And so that inspired the image for today's art journal. So I'm going to go ahead and grab our tracers for this month, and you'll have to let me know if the broadcast is still working. It looks like the internet's a little bit sketchy, but here's what we have today. We have this beautiful piece of pottery, and I'm going to use that as my subject for painting today. Now, I love to use tracers. You can always freehand if you'd like, but tracers are really fun. They take the pressure off, and you don't always have to be a perfect drawer if you want to do some pretty artwork. Okay. By the way, I've said this before, but just because you're using a tracer doesn't mean you're not an artist. In fact, some art historians, went back and looked at some really famous paintings. I'm talking about Da Vinci type famous. I'm not sure if it was him also, but they looked at some very famous artwork, and they found that many artists from way back that we consider classic paintings and artists and things like that actually used something equivalent to a tracer, either from their own artwork. They'd take a piece of paper and lay it down on the wall or whatever they were going to use, or they actually copied each other quite a bit. They can find a lot of similarities between artwork, and at that time it wasn't considered plagiarism like it is now. It was considered a compliment to have another fellow artist borrow your poses or your type of artwork or whatever. Nowadays, it is considered plagiarism if you're using somebody's artwork. But if you are not selling it and you're just learning to draw, go ahead and use the images. Just don't sell things that belong to other people if you don't have permission or haven't paid for the images. That's the key. Anyway, but as you are learning, definitely imitate other artists, because that's how you learn. And tracers are one of the best ways to get your brain wrapped around what shapes look like what, and especially for things like animals and people and faces and things like that. If you have a basic shape to go off of to start with, it really gets your brain wrapped around, wow, that's not a circle, that's an oval, or that's kind of a squarish shape, actually. I never thought about that. And it's just a great way to practice drawing before you're super confident in your skills and still end up with a really fun piece of art. Okay, so here's my little tracer traced out there, and this is graphite paper that I'm using right here. So this is just graphite paper with the pigmented side down, and then I just put my tracer on top of that. And the next thing I'm going to grab is my lettering tracer. Now, every month I send out some lettering and I send out some really fun tracers that go with our theme for the month. And Yod has this beautiful verse, "Thy hands have made and fashioned me." And I've just gone ahead and made that into a tracer so that I don't have to do the lettering freehand. So I'm just going to take that, lay that down right here, and trace over top of that. And look, anybody can do this. Hey, Terry, I'm so glad to see you on. Thanks for watching. So, Terry, you will have to tell me what your plans are for today. It's Friday. Are you going to be out in the garden again? Okay, so, and I'm just going to trace each word. You don't even have to do this. You could do this all by hand, freehand. But this is just, some days you don't want to have to be thinking about how to get your lettering perfect or worrying about your lines being straight. Not that your journal has to be perfect, but we like our stuff to look pretty when we're done. And if you just want to take some of the pressure off, it can be just a really easy way to do it, just by tracing the letters. You can also do this with your own phrases or poetry. I know Terry was talking about potentially writing up her own stuff. You can type it up on the computer, find a font that you really like, and arrange it however you want using your whatever your favorite graphics program is. It could also be just Word documents. Arrange it however you want it, and then print it out and trace it directly onto your journal, and that works really well. Terry says she's got that's a lot, 2,500 pounds of rocks to put down in her river. Woo! That is a lot, Terry. I think that'll do the trick, don't you? It should be totally full by now. She has a really cute rock river. Really, really fun. So we're going to go ahead and get started on this. I'm going to use an eraser to erase the darkest lines. Whenever we use graphite paper or carbon paper, there's always some dark lines behind. And I like to erase the darkest lines of those because they can smudge a little bit when I'm painting. And they're also just hard to cover up with the watercolor. So I like to just kind of take off that real dark pigment and leave just a nice light traced out image below. All right, so that's easy peasy. And if you guys remember from last week, I have this beautiful gold and silver page with gems and things like that. And then you can transfer it over here. Or I mean, sorry, this color is going to transfer over to here. So I'm going to use the same kinds of colors. Let me look at my brushes. I'm reading Terry's thing and trying to talk at the same time, and that is not a good idea. Terry is saying, never thought of printing my words. Yeah, you can totally print your own words. As a matter of fact, you can print almost anything. If you see something you really like, you can print it and trace it. And like I said, if you are practicing your art, just go for it. Do not worry about it being somebody else's work. The only time you have to worry about it is if you're about to go sell it. So don't sell somebody else's work or something you've copied. But if you're just practicing, go for it. I'm going to grab a paper towel real quick because I just realized I don't have one. Okay, here we go. Big old roll of paper towels. I have my watercolor cloth around here somewhere, but I am off away from my normal art area. So I don't know where I stuck it. I'm borrowing another space. I'm borrowing our church's space, which is really nice. Alrighty. So we're just going to create a really pretty, beautiful piece of pottery right here. And I love all the swirls and everything on here. It's actually kind of hard to decide what to do with this because it is so gorgeous. So what I want to do first is give it some kind of a background. I don't want it just to be floating in the air. So I'm going to make sure my words are nice and erased first. And I'm going to take my biggest brush. This is Master's Touch Round brush. And I'm going to use a peachy pink. Now this pink that I mixed up is already on my palette. It is a combination of carmine and might have a touch of orange in it, but it's mostly carmine and some white. So I'm using my Komorebi Mozart set. And I'm going to just start, before I get that on my brush, I'm going to start with a wet background. So just a wet background. And all I'm doing is taking clean water and making the space behind this little picture this little piece of pottery nice and wet. And I'm going to get it nice and wet all the way around, all the way down to the bottom, around here. And then I'm going to draw that white all the way, or that clear all the way out to the edge. Now what I'm doing is I'm giving myself a space to drop in color. Now, very quickly, I'm going to drop in the pink that I just mentioned earlier. It's kind of a carmine white mixture. And the reason I started with a wet page is so that when this color touches my page, it fades out in a nice little cloudy pattern instead of being super, super harsh like a big old brush stroke. Now I'm going to get a little bit more on my brush because I'm running out of pigment here. But I want to do this while it's wet because it'll just fade out nicely into the background. Just like that. Whereas if I do this on a dry page, it will not fade nicely. And I can use a clean wet brush to help blend that out. This just gives my vase, I don't know if you call it, this is more like a pitcher, but it gives my little piece of pottery more of a background without the background being totally painted. I'm not a huge fan of just like a total wash of paint unless you're doing like a sky or something. And then if I did do that, I'd probably mask it off and do something a little different. But just want it to kind of fade out into the white space around it. So I need to make sure it's nice and soft. And just gently drop that in. See how that blends so nicely? I'm going to get a little bit more carmine. Just come in while this is wet and give it a little more shading. I'm going to maybe even give it a shadow down here with that red. And then just use that clean brush to kind of fade that out. And I'm just sort of sweeping it around. If something's too heavy, I can kind of blend it out with a clean brush. But it doesn't take a lot, so you can just kind of play with it a little bit. And I'm going to take the tip of my brush and just add a little bit more dark around the edges. Just really want this vase to stand out against the background. Okay, now I'm going to get a little bit more wet on my brush. A little bit more wet on this brush. And I'm just blending this color out that is a little harsh. Just helping it soften a little. Just like that. Ta-da! Very nice. And then we'll do a little bit more red on the bottom. What I want is for this to have a nice little shadow here. So I'm going to make sure there's some red down there at the bottom. Hey, Daniel, good morning. Okay, so a little bit more red on the bottom, and that'll give it a nice shadow. I really want there to be a good crisp line, so that's why I keep coming back to this right here. And I'm just dropping in more and more pigment on that. Let's see. Hopefully you guys can see me. I hope the internet's not being too bad. Let me know how the internet is doing. I think my image keeps cutting out. Hopefully it's holding. All right. So that's our basic outline of color. You can see that dark shadow down at the bottom is going to really make that vase look like it's not floating mid-air, which is what we want. We want it to just kind of have a little spot to sit. And notice I'm pulling the shadow out a little bit because we still have this handle here that would create a shadow. And we also have the rest of the body of this vase. So you don't just want the shadow where the foot of the pottery is. You want it all over. Okay, so now that's pretty much taken care of. And what we're going to do for the next layer of color is add some of the other colors that we have on this opposite page. So I'm going to remind you what we had on this page was lots of gold and silver, really pretty blues and peaches and golds. So we're going to use those same colors because I love for my two pages to match, even if they're from different weeks. So I'm going to have this one have a lot of the same colors. So starting with the golden color, which we'll treat kind of like a pottery color. So even though it's a different element, like in reality the pottery is not gold, it can still be the same color and get the same coordinating color scheme across. So I'm going to start with yellow ochre, and I'm going to warm it up with a little bit of red ochre. I think that's going to give us a nice tan color, and I'm going to add just a little bit of white to that, which is going to be a nice soft beige. That'll be close enough to the color that we want. Okay. And I would say if you have a tracer that you're going off of, like this one that I have, I go ahead and I look at this tracer while I'm painting, because you might have traced out all the little swirls, but they're kind of hard to see once you've erased and painted over them and all of that. So I always keep my tracer nearby so I can look at it and try to get close to what that looks like. Okay, so now I'm going to do the background with a watered down version of the beige that I just created. And I'm not going to cross over the little band that I have here. I'm going to leave that and just fill in this area down here at the bottom. I'm going to also leave a little bit of the foot down at the bottom, which I kind of painted over, but I'm going to leave a little tiny foot there. And then just fill in all of this. And I'm going to leave a tiny bit of shine here and there. Not very much, but just a little. And fill all of that in. And then I'm also going to come up to the top here. I'm still using my massive brush because I just want to be able to cover a lot of space all at once. And then the very tip as well. I'm going to leave that little gap in between so that there's a space for some blue later on. Now I'm going to grab a little bit darker of the red ochre because I like that it has that warm tone to it, and I'm going to use this for shading the outer edge and the edge down here. I'm also just going to go ahead and go all the way around where the roundness could be. And notice I'm putting this on really heavy, but I'm going to blend it in, so don't be worried about that. Okay, and I'm going to take my brush. I'm actually going to switch to my smaller brush, which is my long, round Princeton Velvet Touch brush number 10. And I'm going to use that to blend in those more harsh lines. You can actually leave those. It just gives it more of like a sketch type look. Like you don't have to blend in the edges. I just like to blend. If you want more of an abstract look or a more of a quick sketch look, you can leave those lines. I mean, it doesn't need to be perfectly blended in. And it gives it a kind of a charming, like quick, almost illustrated look if you leave those lines. So you could try that sometime if you're interested. I'm going to come around here with my shadow just so that it shows that this round shape is its own shape and that little handle comes off of that. So I'm going to go ahead and give that a nice round shape there. And I'm using almost exclusively the red ochre right now just because it is nice and dark. Ooh, so warm looking. I love that. Wow. Okay. I'm trying not to use too much water because I don't want to create some big tide lines over here. So I'm sweeping up some of those bigger puddles, just kind of blending the rest in. It's okay if it gets a little puddly, but I don't want to make it that way. I'm going to also match the depth of the shading I have on this area by coming up here and putting that same value on my rim and this little detailing here. This will also give my vase some more crisp edges, which will be nice. I'm going to bring this all the way out. I think that's supposed to be further out. There we go. And I'll use a clean wet brush to blend that in. Just kind of pulling it in a little bit. I'm not totally painting that in. I want to leave some light space in the middle. Okay, like that. And now I'm going to come down and do some of the same thing. Notice I'm turning the page, rotating my work. If you are uncomfortable, if your hand is uncomfortable, your painting will be a little bit strained and it'll be harder to get the lines that you're wanting. So turn your book if you need to. Whatever direction you need to turn it to make your hand comfortable is the way to go. And I'm just adding some darker lines to crisp up the handle. I'm going to also give this edge another pass of that red ochre while it's drying. And just give it a nice dark shadow right there. That'll just really round off that edge over there. Like that. I'm going to come around here and do the same thing on the bottom. And on this little edge right there. Just kind of creating the round shape using shading. I'm going to blend that in a little bit with a clean wet brush. And it doesn't need to be totally blended in. I'm just going to do a little bit more. Okay, so just looking for areas where it can be a little brighter, but that's as good as it gets on that one. I mean, it could be a lot more, but we're doing an art journal page, not a full painting, so we don't need to be like obsessive. That is so hard. Okay, I'm going to take my cloth and clean off a space on my palette here because I'm going to introduce a new color. So now we're going to use azurite blue, still using the same brush, but this is going to be our accent color on our pottery. I really love this color. I'm actually going to pick up, I think, a little bit more green, so I'm going to grab some turquoise actually, add that in just to give my blue a little bit of a greenish tint. I'm going to add in that turquoise. I love that color. So pretty. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same color, this blue that I just made. I'm going to use that on all the areas that are not currently that nice tan color. So just fill this in carefully. I kind of like to outline first because it gives my water somewhere to run to. Just like if you were little and you were coloring in the edges first. I don't know if your mom or dad taught you to do it that way, but when you're coloring in a coloring book, and then I fill in the middle, and I'll dry off my brush and just kind of pull the color in, blend it in really nicely, like that. And you don't have to color it all the way in. You can leave a little bits of white space. I just got carried away. I'm going to lift some of the color in the center because I really want it to be a little lighter in the middle. So I am using a dry brush while it's wet and picking up some of that color. And I see my hand leave the screen. What I'm doing is I'm wiping it on this cloth, picking up the color and wiping it off on this cloth. So I'm sponging it off basically, using my brush as a sponge. And I'm now going to take a darker shade of this same color. I'm just going to get a little bit more pigment on my brush with the turquoise. Let me put this over here so you guys can see that. And I'm going to drop that in on the edges. Ooh, that's so pretty. Ah, okay. I love that. Okay, that's really pretty. Oh man, that's gorgeous. I just love this color. Ah. Hope you guys like that. Alrighty, this is really pretty. I'm going to take a wet brush, clean wet brush, not super drippy because you don't want to make big puddles. I'm just blending in that edge a little bit. And now I'm going to do the next rim before I run out of the color that's on my palette. So taking some of that blue again, going up here in this little area. Notice my yellow has bled into this little white area a little bit. That's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. It'll get the idea, and it'll look kind of fun and a little bit old worldy because it's not perfect. And that's so beautiful. I love this color. Wowza. Wowza. I really like that color. Okay, I'm going to pick up this pigment on the middle again, just like I did with the other one, just lifting some of that color. I like for there to be some white space, or at least lighter space, and that just makes it look like there's some light hitting it. Oh, I'm just adoring this color. Wow. Okay, so pretty. All right, I'm going to come around this way, water my brush down a little bit. What I'm doing is I'm getting a little more turquoise, darker and more pigmented on my brush, and just dropping it in like that on this edge as well. And I'm going to go right along the border of the gold color just to darken that edge up a little bit. Wow. Wow. Really like that. I really like that. So cute. Okay. Very pretty. This reminds me of VBS props or something, you know, for Vacation Bible School. Okay. Now I'm going to lift a little bit more of that color because I really want that light to show up. Really want it to show up like this. So I'm just taking and I'm drying my brush off with my fingers, which is not very orthodox, but whatever. All right, I'm going to turn my thing around so that I can use the right angle on my hand to do the bottom. And this is just the little base foot of this picture. Really fun. Ta-da! Okay, I got super quiet because I was concentrating on that line. It's a little tiny line. I'm going to take a little more turquoise and drop it in on the bottom. Give it a nice dark base. And also right along the edge of the gold. And on the outer edge. Ha! Look how that just frames the whole thing in. Wow. I did not know I would enjoy this painting so much today, you guys. I'm having a blast. Okay, so this is I'm gonna lift off. Whee! I can fly. I'm gonna lift off a little bit of the color right here. I know this is a small space, but just that little bit of color lifted off with a tiny bit of shine can make a world of difference. Just makes it brighter. I'm gonna take some of that off. Lifting this over here. So that little bit of shine, look at that tiny, tiny bit of shine. Do you see that white? It should be showing up on the camera for you guys. I can see it on my screen at least. Yeah, that little bit of shine there, there, and there. See how that just makes it go ting? So pretty. I'm going to use my liner brush and do some lettering while I let some of this dry, and then we'll come back and finish it up. So I'm going to use a liner brush. This is my 10-aught Master's Touch liner brush. Sorry, not 10, 20-aught. And I'm going to wet it down. When you're doing lettering, you want your pigment to be the consistency of ink, which makes sense. So just think about if you've ever burst an ink pen, it's kind of a little bit sticky, kind of thick, but it flows. It's kind of, you gotta kind of feel it out. And a good idea if you're gonna do lettering with paint is just to practice a bunch on some practice paper and practice on the kind of paper you're going to be doing your lettering on. So if you're gonna do it on your journal, maybe reserve one journal page just for practicing. But you basically want to create a little puddle of pigment that's nice and thick. So here you can see I'm making a nice thick puddle. But it still needs to flow, so it needs to have a good amount of water in it so that when you pick it up, you're not just dragging your brush along the page. A lot of times I'll use a bigger brush to mix up the puddle because sometimes that allows me to get more color, more water and everything. And then I'll switch to my liner brush to mix it. But for this case, I just need a little tiny bit. I'm going to use this color, which is the same color I used for the picture, but a little bit watered down. You can kind of see that color if I paint it out this way a little bit. So I'm going to pick that up on my brush, and this is what I'm going to use for the word made. So this is the part of the show where Marina stops talking, because if Marina talks while she writes, she misspells words on live, and nobody likes that. Okay, here we go. Talk amongst yourself. And this is, here I go talking again. This is basic calligraphy. All I did was trace it, and I'm going to do thick downstrokes and thin upstrokes, and you'll see that thick and thin upstrokes, thick downstrokes, thin upstroke, thick downstroke. I'm just going to take my time. There we go. And that's all you need for your lettering. You can tell because it's watercolors, some parts of the letters are darker, some parts of the letters are lighter, and that bugs some people, but that's just kind of the beauty of watercolor, the look of watercolor. It gets lighter and darker, and that's really, really actually kind of the magic of it. Now, if you don't want to stress about having really thin brush strokes or whatever, you can always use a brush. My favorite brushes for lettering are, sorry, not brush, pen. My favorite pens for lettering are Fudenosuke brush pens, and they are by Tombow. Here's what they look like. And my favorite one is this particular one. It's a blue pen. The pen itself is navy blue, but the ink is black. So that's my favorite. It's the hard tip, and they actually come in all different colors. This hard tip version comes in all different colors. I have a whole set of them, as you can see. And I'm not as big of a fan of the colors because they are a little bit, in my opinion, they're not as pigmented as I want them to be. But this black one is a beautiful pen, and it works really, really well. So I'm going to try to see if I can use the red one for some lettering. And if it's weird, I'm just not going to do it. So I'm going to trace it on here. Daniel says, whoa, nice. I love that font look. Thank you. It is really fun. Okay, so now I've just sampled my ink, and it's looking like it's going to work really well. So I'm going to use this for the block font. Now, I'm kind of, for lack of a better word, wasting this pen on these letters because this is a brush pen, and I'm using it for a block font, which does not require brush strokes. But I love to have as little art supplies as possible. So I don't even have pens that are this nice in fine tip. I just keep using these for whatever I need, whether it's calligraphy or fine tip lettering or whatever. And they work great. And I love how pigmented they are. So I just go with it. Let's see. Let me make sure I don't write this wrong. Okay. And fashioned me. Okay, my tracer is fading. I had to read what the verse actually said. I can see the letters, but not enough to wing it. Ta-da! I'm going to do little quotes as well. Bing. Isn't that cute? So because we used a carmine, or sorry, I think I've been saying carmine the whole time. I'm so sorry. We used crimson for this color. Crimson and white for the color of the background of this pottery. So this color, crimson is, obviously red. So our pen is actually red and still looks good because our base for our pink was the same tone. So that works really well. When you're doing lettering, you always want to go pigment darker anyway, and sometimes it's hard to match those. Just think about a little bit darker color, and you can usually match it pretty well. It's one of the reasons I love to do lettering with paint instead of with a pen. But in this case, it works really well because we weren't using a pink. We actually used watered down crimson, so that worked really well. I think I said that worked really well like 4 times, so. Let's go ahead and do our scrolly work on this piece of pottery. Again, I want to have this tracer nearby because I want to be able to see the little swirls, and I don't want to have to guess on where those are. So I can see them traced out, but just like on my lettering, it's easy for them to get lost. So I'm going to use the same color I used for my lettering. So I'm using the same really beautiful dark teal. And I'm going to go ahead and do all this scroll work with that, and be careful not to smudge my lettering with my hand. Now, always, always, always be okay to turn your page if you need to whatever is good for your hand. Just double checking where my curl comes. And when I'm doing curly stuff like this, I will also use the same technique you do with lettering, which is to do thick and thin brush strokes. Okay, I'm just checking where that is. And notice I'm picking up, just like I do with lettering, picking up my brush and going to the next curve. My brush is also splitting a little and creating these little extra hairs, and that's okay. I'm just letting that happen because it looks kind of cool. Not everything that is an accident has to be fixed. See how my brush split and created two little stripes? Now I'm kind of exaggerating it because it did it originally, and now I'm kind of going with it. So I've pressed down and let the bristles split a little more on purpose. But that created a look I wasn't planning for, and now I have a cool design that I didn't know I would have. So just be okay with letting your artwork morph as you go. Sometimes it's better. The accidental designs are sometimes better than what you planned. Got another little curl right here. And then there's these really fun things, but I'm going to maybe modify them a little bit. They look a little harsh and pointy, so maybe I'll just kind of make them a little bit softer at the top. There's this little point in the middle. That worked. Something like that. Looks like there's a curve coming down this way. And one that matches on this side. Symmetrical stuff is kind of hard. A lot of times I will actually purposefully make stuff not symmetrical because, oh, Terry, you're hilarious. I will purposefully make stuff not symmetrical so that it doesn't have to be symmetrical. So sometimes I will add something else or kind of make it a little wonky so that even the symmetrical images are not perfect. And I like that better. It's a lot less stressful. Terry says, that worked really well. Thanks for saying it a fifth time. I don't know, I was like hearing myself say that. I was like, how many times have I said that? So glad it worked so well. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit more of this turquoise. I'm mixing up a little bit more on my palette. And bring the curl up this way. Ooh, maybe this way. That's kind of cute. Like that. And then there are some fun curls on the teal itself. So I didn't actually trace those, I don't think. So I'm just going to wing it on these ones. Maybe I did and I just can't see them anymore. So there's super scrolly, curly things. This could definitely be freehand. I'm just trying to match the picture. Plus, I do a lot of curls freehand, and because I do them so often, I kind of get stuck in a rut of how I do them. So sometimes I like to go exactly based on what an image is, so maybe I can learn a different way to twist them or draw them so they look different. You can always learn. So I would never have drawn these this way if I was doing it myself. I mean, from scratch. And now I've just learned a different way to do it. I'm adding in a little bit more curls than they did. Okay, there's that. Ooh, that's fun. Okay, and then the last is these fun little, almost like little teardrop shapes, but they're kind of like little ovals. And go down this section here. Okay, and I would like to incorporate some of the crimson into the pottery as well. So I'm going to take some of my red, which is crimson, number 17, and also white to tone it down a little. That keeps using white when you're doing watercolors keeps your paint thick, so it doesn't water it down to where it's more transparent, but it lightens the color. So normally you lighten the color by adding water, but if you don't want to water it down and make it more transparent, you can just add white if your palette has white. I'm going to do the little teardrop shapes on here. They're kind of evenly spaced across, so I'll do my best. But let's see what happens. There we go, super light. That's the only design that's actually on there, but I'm going to put a little bit more in. It looks like there is something on the handle, so I guess I'll do that. We do little stripes on the handle. Now notice where my shine is on the handle, I'm going to skip that area. So I'm going to do my lines up to that line, but there's light hitting it, so I don't want to cover up where the light might be hitting it. So I'm just going to make my lines go around that, if that makes sense. Like that, so they kind of like morph around the shine. You could also add like a really light pink line between there if that was more appealing to you. Terry says pretty. Thank you so much. I'm going to add a little bit more. I'm going to add a little stripe up here of pink. I think that'll pull it in a little bit better. This is kind of a reddish pink. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And that's pulling in all that red from the rest of the page. So I think that looks really nice to have a red top there somewhere. I'm going to do a little bit of red inside these little points here. And look, that's just like a little stripe, but look how much that adds. And I'm going to do a little bit off of these little curls. Little extras, tiny little extras. And I'm going to kind of come and follow these a little bit. It's kind of pretty, just kind of adding little wispy extra things. Yeah. I like it a lot. A little bit more red up here. I'm just really liking this red. It's like I can't get enough of it. All right, I think that's enough. Okay, that's all we have for today. Here is our art journal page, and it was inspired by this verse from Yod, which is Psalm 119:73, which we read earlier. And this verse that says, "Thy hands have made and fashioned me," reminded me of pottery, because there's another scripture in the Bible that talks about how God is the potter and we are the clay. So here's a great simple art journal page. You can definitely doll this up whatever way you want, but there you go. There's your prompt for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and share it. Sorry, with someone else who might enjoy it, who might need to be reminded that they were made in the image of God. Alrighty, thank you guys so much. Thanks, Daniel and Terry, and anyone else who's watching, please say hashtag replay if you end up watching the replay, and hashtag live if you're watching the live. Thank you all again, and I will be live again next week I'm live every Friday. I should put this on the screen. I'm live every Friday at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time, 12:30 Central, 1:30 Eastern, right here on Art Worthy Life, doing a whole art journal page from start to finish. Thank you. Have a blessed day. Bye.